Yes, we are live now. Please start. Yes, we are live now. Please start. Yeah, you can
Okay.
mute the YouTube. Okay, you can mute the YouTube video so that it will be a loop will be there. So mute the YouTube video. Fine, it will.
Yes.
Please.
Okay. I have muted the YouTube video. Does that work right now?
Yeah, fine. Thanks.
Okay. Okay. Fair enough. But I don't see how do I see if people are online or not?
Yes, around 10 people are waiting. You can start. You can answer the questions. You can ask me if you have any doubts. No issues.
So there's no way of seeing how many people are actually online, is there?
Yeah, you can check on the YouTube link. It will show how many people are waiting in the YouTube. How many people are waiting in the YouTube?
Okay. Hi everyone. I am Raj Banerjee. I am the TA for this course. English Romanticism from 1798 to 1832. So I'm just trying to figure out, I'll just take a couple of minutes to figure out how this actually works. And yeah, I'm actually juggling with between Zoom and YouTube, and it's great to meet you. First of all, it's great to see some of you online. And if I'm audible at all, would you just let me know right away? I can see a lot of greetings, yes. But am I audible? Can you hear me? Yeah, great. Yeah, there is probably a little lag here. So yeah, I mean, yes, I can see a lot of you actually saying that you can hear me. So yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much for getting back to me on that. So there are a couple of questions that I already have, but before I get to that, I would actually uh, very formally welcome you to this online session today. And I'm so glad to be doing this, and I'm so glad that all of you are here. So, as I as I said, there are a couple of questions that I already have, But is there any other questions that you have right now? I'm actually looking at the chat box right now. So, do you have any questions right away regarding how this course is going? Or even if you do not have any questions, do you have any opinions on how things are going? By which I actually mean, what I'm asking you is like, how do you feel about going through this course? You have been writing assignments, you have been like going through the lectures. Yes, I see a couple of responses. Yes, I see. Yes, enjoying a lot. Yes. And I see Ananya's answer as well. Yes, Ananya had a couple of questions as well, which I'll get to in a bit. That's a very important question, actually. And yes, thank you, Kavita, as well for that. Yes, Monali, thank you as well for, yes, the syllabus is, yeah, yes, it is like definitely like very well organized. Yes, Professor Nair has thought about it for several years before actually coming up with this syllabus. Yes, so it should be organized. And yeah, on the other hand, yeah, someone has actually mentioned this is going very smoothly. Yes, that's good. That's good. Now, yes, Saurabha, I don't know. Like, pardon me if I'm like saying your name wrong, but yeah, someone has mentioned that being an engineering student, this is like a great way to learn English in a poetic way. But yes, 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 that's the thing. Some of my best students have been from the engineering department as well. So yeah, yes, great. Thank you, Milani and Dakshani as well. Okay, so I'll just since there are no more questions as such, I'll just jump into a couple of things. There are quite a number of you who are online by now. I'll just jump into a couple of questions right now. So the first question was, are the questions like MCQs? So this is something I don't know what that question meant. So if like, and this is for everyone right now. Do you mean, uh, is there any MCQ questions in the final exam? I will say yes. Most of the questions that you will get in your final exams are MCQs. Okay. And if you have been like submitting your assignments from time to time, even if not every one of them, I have seen like on the forum. Um, by the way, if not every one of you are on the forum, please do like sign up or like join the forum. And there are some very interesting questions. And sometimes people have asked me about some books and some texts which I have actually like given uh, with some scans and with the bibliography and stuff like that. So if you have any questions, just do ask on the forum as well, right? So yeah, as people have been asking and as I have been telling them on the forum, most of the questions in your final exam will be MCQ. Okay. And that is all I will say right now. And I think that answers a question that was asked. There will be. Okay, I just got something about being audible. You all can hear me, right? Yeah. I'm actually answering some of the major questions. So, yeah, I hope I'm still audible. Yes, for example, like Vishesh is asking, as the previous question was, whether there'll be like both descriptive as well as MCQ questions. Most of the questions will be MCQ. Yes. Pantheism, yes. We'll get into the content in a moment. Dulcie, yes. Definitely. I'll get back on the content in a moment. And I will talk about pantheism. Yes. Thank you for that question. But yeah, as far as the exams are concerned, this is like we are what, like 6 weeks already done with within a course which is 8 weeks long. And I think you know what the exams would be like, right? So is there any other questions about the exams or the format of the questions as such? Yes, Kavita, I will like get back on the books as well. But before that, I just want to know if there's any questions on the exam format as such. Okay, I'll just move on right now. Hopefully, and if you have any other questions, just like put it on the forum or just ask me later as well, right? Okay. Uh, about the books, let me start with that. If you all just log in to the course, and if you like go to the course, and if you see in the course description, there is a long list of books, a long list of books, as well as authors as well. By authors, I mean uh, critical authors, like scholars from the 20th century who have written about the Romantic period itself, right? It is on the website. So please do go and check them. If you really want to actually read those things, please do go and check them. Some of you have actually asked me about it, and I have supplied certain materials as well. Do tell me if you do not get hold of certain books, or if you cannot get access to certain materials. Do let me know. I will try and like supply those things to you. But on the other hand, do look at the website. Everything is on the website. All the books that you actually require is on the website, right? So that's something that you need to like actually look into. What was the other question here? Okay, Ananya, about your last question about dates being postponed, I am not the right person to actually answer that question. Please, like, like, uh, ask your authorities. Like, if you're in college, like, ask them. If you are like directly taking the course online, just uh, write to support at NPTEL, or just go to the forum and ask this question, and someone will get back to you, right? So yeah, that goes for, yeah, about the hall tickets as well. So these things you need to like just ask on the forum, and someone will definitely get back to you on that, right? Either I will get back to you when I have more information, or someone will get back to you from the admin team, right? So about the exam tickets and whether it can be postponed, whether you can have other kinds of arrangements. So yeah, so those are the things which you need to like post on the forum, right? Yeah, Melanie, as yeah, once again, yeah, there might be descriptive questions in the final exam. I don't know what you're asking. If it is the final exam that you're asking about, yeah, there might be descriptive questions, there might be multiple choice questions, but as I said, most of the questions will be multiple choice. Most of the questions. So if you have been looking at your weekly assignments, if you have been submitting them regularly, you know what kind of questions there are. There will be direct questions, certain factual questions. For example, in which year was the London Times, for example, established, published, released? Which year was like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein published, right? So those kind of questions will be there, and there will be questions which are like inferential type, which will have certain kinds of notions that you have to have when you have gone through the entire course. They might not be very direct questions, but there will be like multiple choice questions mostly, is what I will say. Okay, so given that, I will come back to a couple of questions that I have already received. So one was on, and yes, who was it? I forget your name. I'm sorry about that. Someone asked about pantheism as well. I think it was Dulcie. Yes. But before that, there are a couple of questions which I've already received before I went online today. So one of them was about sensibility. So in terms of sensibility, if you like go through the lectures, this is one of the major things, major themes in Romanticism. People have been exploring sensibility, talking about sensibility, and criticizing sensibility as well, right? And if you go through your lectures, you will actually know that it had to do with like self awareness and also the awareness of the other, right? So there was the question of, so, okay, so sensibility comes from the word sense, right? So if you have to like know yourself, you have to know the other, was the major paradigm of the Romantic period, right? People like Wordsworth, people like Coleridge, people like Shelley, all of them actually wrote several kinds of literature. They wrote letters, they wrote uh, theory, but at the end of the day, there was this one fundamental question about how you sense the sensibility, right? That is, I don't know, like apart from the lecture, I don't know what else to tell you about it. At the end of the day, you all you have to know about sensibility is that people were in that period, and throughout the 19th century, actually, not only in that period, throughout the 19th century, people were talking about self awareness as well as the awareness of the other. So Henry Mackenzie came up with the question of a man of feeling. Godwin, a little later, came up with the question of a new man of feeling, right? But what do you get out of that when you're reading these kind of novels? What you're getting out of it is how you're feeling yourself as well as feeling the other. And by now, after the fifth or the sixth week, you know by now that the man of feeling is not only the man of feeling, there is a woman of feeling. And if there is the man or the woman, it is not the European white male or the white female there, right? So the question of how how they're looking at themselves, how Britain is looking at themselves, I still hope that people can hear me. I don't know. Yes, okay. Yeah. Thank you, Kavita, Partho, and Ananya. Yeah. Thank you for that. Yes. So I'm really sorry if I am being like cut off, but yes. No, I can see all the questions. Yes. Thank you so much. So yes, so by sensibility, that is what the romantics are doing at that time. So you have seen not only the questions in your assignments, but also the lectures, and you have had the recommended readings as well. If you read those, you will see that connects as well to several other questions as well. The question of sensibility that connects actually with other things as well. For example, the question of nature, that was the major motive in the romantic period, right? How you actually see the daffodils, for example. Wordsworth is writing about the daffodils. How you see daffodils is not the question, but how you see yourself looking at those daffodils, how you're looking at the solitary reaper, how you are actually looking at yourself looking at Tinton Abbey. That is a question Wordsworth is asking. And the same thing with Shelley, for example. It's not the question of how Prometheus is unbound. The question is how Shelley in the Romantic period is actually looking at something unbound, right? And these are the questions which are all connected with the question of sensibility itself, because sensibility in itself, and I think who was it who uh, just put something on the question panel right now, the difference between sense and sensibility. So this is this is the difference. Sense is something which you are not always um conscious about. Sense is not recognizable, while sensibility is, right? Because sensibility is something which you are consciously going about writing in the romantic period, which is our major focus here, and which people have done later as well. But in the Romantic period, people are writing about sensibility in the sense that they know and they are conscious about what they're writing about. Does that answer the question? Yes, I'll get to pantheism. Yes. But about sense, sensibility is is that clear here? Okay, there's a very interesting question here about the net exam. I'm really sorry, this is a course which doesn't address that. Yes, the second part of the question is very interesting. how is the romantic age going to help us with that is a question we need to address, right? And there will be, I mean, you there are a couple of things that you will actually read through this course. One is about facts, who Shelley is, who Coleridge is, who Wordsworth is, right? Those are the things, when you know, it will help you. It will help you. I cannot guarantee whether there will be a question on romanticism at all in your net exam the next year, right? But on the other hand, I can guarantee you this, that if you know who Shelley, Coleridge, Wordsworth, Godwin, Rousseau, these people are, when you know who these people are, you would have already known a bit of what literature is about, and that will help you solve several other questions. For example, W.B. Yeats in the 1900s, right, which is the 20th century, W.B. Yeats is also called a romanticist, right? And you will be able to know what modernism is if you know your Coleridge, your Shelley, your Wordsworth. So that's how I would answer the question about the net exam. Yes, I will get to the question of pre-Marxist criticisms and capitalism in a moment, but I do already have a couple of other questions, so I'll go back to those for a moment. Okay, I think it was, yeah, the question about the shift from religion to individuality. There was a question about that. I don't know if the person is online right now, but yeah, there was this very fascinating question about whether romanticism was actually a movement that shifted from religion to individuality. Now, there are a couple of ways to answer that question, and there's a very interesting question actually. If you have been following your lectures for the last 6 weeks, you know by now that everything about the romantics was about individuality, right? So it's not a question of whether things were moving from religion to individuality. It was rather a question of how religion itself was looked at, right? And more than religion, there was something called theology, and people called it natural theology, right? People like Wordsworth, people like Coleridge, people in there was German Romanticism as well. So people like Goethe and people like Schiller, right? If you go through your transcripts as well, there you will find people like Friedrich Schiller and Schlegel. These people actually influenced the English Romantics so much more than how we actually look at them, right? The point is, these are the people who were deeply invested in religion as well. But the question is not about religion versus individuality. The question is how individuality was looked at within religion itself. Yeah, I'll just take a pause because there were. Yes, Gulam. I will respond. Absolutely. I will respond to all the questions. Thanks for the reminder. Let me finish what I was actually saying, right? So, yeah, going back to the question of individuality versus religion, the question is, how was individuality actually looked at within religion itself, within theology itself? People like Wordsworth, people like Coleridge, there were all these questions in place even then. And that is where the question of pantheism comes in, right? Pantheism was something that was, I mean, that had its root in religion, in theology, right? And this will answer like two questions at once. For example, what is Wordsworth actually talking of when he's writing the prelude? Right? If you have read the prelude, you will, at least the beginning of prelude, you will know what is Wordsworth talking of when he is writing the poem called Nutting. Right? It has been spoken of in your lecture a couple of times by now. What is Wordsworth talking of when he's writing Tintonabbee? Right? There are so many kinds of theological inferences, theological references, theological allusions. Right? What is he doing with those? One thing that is absolutely sure is that he is talking of a world where the human being and nature are in unity, or he's trying to unify them. And that is the basis of pantheism. We are in the pandemic era, right? And this is something you need to like understand very well. What does pan mean? Pan is something that connects everything else, right? It is beyond yourself, as well as it actually is all encompassing. That is pan. That's what the Latin word pan comes from, right? So pantheism, pandemic. We are in the pandemic era right now, and which means everything is right. So yes, so that is what you need to like look at pantheism through. Now, a very interesting question that might be asked in your final exam as well, like what is pantheism in the pandemic era as well? Okay, before I actually go back to a couple of more questions which were already asked, I will just go through this question panel. There are a couple of people who are a little impatient. For example, yes, Yeats, for example, Yeats was called W.B. Yeats, William Butler Yeats. He was called the last romantic, right? Because romanticism, in this respect, and this connects back to whose question was that? Let me just. Yeah, I think this connects back to Ananya's question as well. How romanticism uh, can be contextualized, or whether it is relevant at all in in today's time, right? So, and yes, and one of the first question which will address Gulam's question as well is whether Yeats is romantic or not, right? So he was called the last romantic. Now the question is, why was he called the last romantic? So there are several kinds of ways we can talk about English literature from the ancient period. We know Shakespeare was writing at a time which was the early modern period. Then we know Milton was writing right after him. Then we know there were several other people who were writing. Then we know there were the Enlightenment era. Then we know there was the Romantic era. And then we know there was the Victorian era, where Dickens and Thomas Hardy and Bram Stoker, Dracula, is being produced, right? And then we see in the 20th century, after the wars, like there was a First World War, there was a Second World War, and there were several kinds of ways we can actually periodize literature, right? But one thing that we cannot actually deny is that Romanticism is one of the only period, I'm sorry, Romantic era is the only period which is not which cannot be actually bound by dates, right? The Victorian era, we know 1830s, we know the day Queen Victoria actually ascended the throne, right? We do not know what Romanticism actually is in terms of a calendar time, right? So therefore, this is a movement in itself. It was hugely popular in that period, 1798. We can call it 1790s. It started a little bit before that. 1789 is when the French Revolution happened. And then it went on till the Victorian period started, right? So that is absolutely there. But at the end of the day, we can actually trace back Romanticism even today. And that is the question of W.B. Yeats, William Butler Yeats. Why he is called the last romantic. When Auden, when Eliot, they are writing about Yeats, Ezra Pound, they are writing about Yeats, they are writing with Yeats, they are all contemporaries in the 20th century. They are all going with the same fascination with Keats, with Shelley. Maybe they are going against Wordsworth, maybe they are going against Coleridge. But yeah, what you are going against is also something that you are acknowledging, right? That brings us back to the question of, I think, Nihal Bharti. Yeah. Well, that's a very interesting question, whether the Romantic period can be called the golden age of literature. Well, that's that's a fascinating question. But the question is, who is asking that, right? For the Romantics, Shakespeare was in the golden age. Even for Milton, Shakespeare was in the golden age, right? The Victorians, they hated the Romantics. They thought the Enlightenment was a golden age. In the 20th century, there were certain people who thought the Romantics were the Romantic period was the golden age. Some people thought the Victorian was the golden age, right? So the golden age of literature has always been one thing. Just understand one thing: the golden age in literature has always been in the past, and it depends on the people who are theorizing it. So for me, it might be the romantic age. For you, it might be something else. I'll just look at a couple of other questions. Mm, Sorry for this long pause, actually. Huh. Negative capability. Yeah. Negative capability has all to do without running after facts or specific rigid reasons, right? That's what Keats is talking about in his letter to his brother, actually. And I think this has been covered in the lecture, and we have gone through certain assignments with this as well. But yeah, I mean, like, if you go back to like Keats's letter, you will see Keats's letter to his brother, where he is actually talking of negative capability. He never defines that term. That's a very interesting thing. He never defines that term. All he says is that we shouldn't be running after facts and specific reasons. We need to be suspended, and that is what Coleridge is talking about, willingly suspending yourself. Coleridge, in his Biographia Literaria, he's talking about the willing suspensions of disbelief. And that is what Blake is talking about in the end with his contraries in his Marriage of Heaven and Hell. He's talking about the same thing in the Songs of Innocence and of Experience, right? So this is what the Romantics were always like struggling with. They were wrestling with the idea of one with the other, right? And negative capability. Byron is talking about, like, Lord Byron, George Gordon Byron. He is talking about romantic irony. So everything being in clash is what develops the kind of sense that you can develop out of anything, whether it is the individual, whether it is the question of race, whether it's the question of gender, whether it's the question of empire, right? You will actually look at several kinds of uh, details. Like, you will listen to the lectures in the next couple of weeks where politics comes in very, very, very strongly, with empire, with race, with gender, with all, all kinds of. Okay, I'm seeing certain things about not being audible. I don't know. Am I audible right now or visible? I don't know if I like lost my connection or not.
You are audible. Go ahead.
Ha. Okay. Okay. All right. Yeah. Thank you so much. Okay, the question about romantic period and romantic era, yes, no, there is no. Yeah, I don't know what's happening with this connection here, but yeah, no, and there is no difference between the period and the era. We actually talk of in different language, like you can have spoken about it as romantic period or a romantic era. Whatever it is, the question of romanticism is something that is different, right? A period or an era is that is what I was like talking about. The period or the era is something that is always time defined, right? It's temporal. It is a temporally defined characteristic of a certain gamut, right? So whether you call it a period, whether you call it an era, you can like specify a certain timeline to it. But the question of romanticism as such goes beyond time, right? And that is the reason why Yeats can be called the last romantic as such, right? And I think we are like going a little beyond time. So, what I'll quickly do, thank you for all your questions, by the way. What I'll quickly do is like just read through the rest of the questions that are like posted here. Yeah, there are a couple of other questions about the net exams. As I have answered before, I mean, this course is not designed to prepare you for the net exam. So, yes, I mean, you might get a couple of questions which might overlap with certain things that you're reading, might overlap with the certain questions that you're r- like attending to during the weekly assignments or by the end of the term when you're like looking at the final exam. But no, I mean, that is all that I can say. I mean, this is not a course that is like designed to prepare you for the next exam. Is there okay, fair enough. I think I have covered everything. Is there any question that okay, scientifism, okay. Yeah, I can talk a bit about science, but yes, before that, is there any other question that you have asked and I haven't answered? Can people just point it out right now by like just dropping the same question or like asking me again? I'm really sorry if I have missed certain things, but within all the things that I discussed, I think things should have been answered. And I'll get back to the question of science. Thanks, Gulam, for that question. Yes. Okay, fair enough. Um, okay, so this is probably one of the last things that I will talk of. Yeah, science. Um, I don't know what you meant by scientifism, but yes, I can talk about science because, and that also has to do with Ananya's question again about why Romanticism or the Romantic period or the Romantic era is actually relevant today, right? And that has to do with science. For example, if you talk of medical science, let's start with that. Medical science itself, because we are in the biggest medical revolution right now, right? So if you're talking of medical science, a stethoscope that was invented in the Romantic period, right? The planet Uranus. Let's go back to astronomy. The planet Uranus was not invented, sorry, discovered by a person called Herschel, right, in the Romantic period, right? Um, what else? Geology, like dinosaur. The word dinosaur itself, we think it's like million years old, billion years old. The word dinosaur was actually coined by a person called Richard Owen in the Romantic period, right? So science had its, with the modern science, quote unquote, modern science. Let's not call it science, let's call it modern science. What we know as modern science actually had its birth in the Romantic period itself, right? So there were several of the, and by the way, going back, let's not digress from what we were learning in our course itself. These are the things that the Romantic writers were aware of. For example, Percy Shelley, his doctor was one of the people who was involved with Richard Owen, right? Coleridge himself actually gave some lectures in Germany, and one of his students was the one who came up with the idea of defining life itself. Right? So all these questions, life sciences actually began in the 19th century, the early 19th century, right? Which is in the Romantic period. And the question is not whether they were invented, discovered in that period, but the question is whether these writers were aware of it or not. All of these people were actually aware of this, and they were writing things, and that's why you find so many kinds of, for example, if you look at William Blake's works, the longer works, you will actually see, I don't know how much of it is actually covered in this lecture. You read little bits and pieces, but when you read those longer works, which are all there on the website, by the way, everything is on the website. Go back and like look at those books materials. William Blake is actually reading and writing about surgery as well, right? So I don't know what you meant by scientifism, but I can tell you this much with confidence that modern science itself began in the Romantic period. Yes, Monali. Yes, description of nature is a question of appreciation of nature too. Yes, absolutely. But that is just one part of it. If you have been following the lectures for the last 6 weeks, you will know that the description of nature has like two parts. One is to do with appreciation, the other part has to do with vandalism as well, or criticism, right? If you read Wordsworth's Nutting, what is happening in the middle? Uh, like someone is just ravishing, words like ravishing is used, right? So, yes, there's a question of appreciation as well as exploitation. Both of them are there. The question of nature is central. Yes, you're right. But how we are looking at nature is a question that the romantics were always. For example, if you look at Shelley, he's talking about the west wind, which has nothing to do with appreciation of nature. It has to do with the inspiration that nature is giving you through a very strong and vehement, violent kind of way, right? The same thing with the volcanic eruptions. Byron is talking about it as well. Yeah, Melanie, I think I did answer that question. I'll just very quickly talk about it one more time about why romanticism is important or relevant today. For example, the question of race, the question of gender. I mean, if you read um, Kubla Khan, right, it is like definitely a question of race, right? If you read Coleridge's Christabel, that has definitely to do with the question of gender differentiations, right? So, question of race, question of gender, question of empire, question of imperial exploitations, everything had found its expressions. Everything had found its expression first in the Romantic period, right? So when you read those now, you're not only like looking at the Romantic period back in the 19th century, you're actually looking at things now through that lens. For example, I know a person who is actually working on the question of surveillance, right? And that has been spoken about, that has been explored, that has been exploited in the Romantic period itself. And what someone else was asking about, the question of science, the modern science itself, all that we are talking of, yes, digital science was not there in the Romantic period. Of course not. But when we are talking of the several kinds of, whether it's astronomy, whether it's geology, whether it's like uh, medical science, whatever it is, they all began in that period itself, right? And I think that is how it can be brought into relevance. Kirtana, yes, negative capability. First of all, it was already discussed in the lecture. You can find it in the transcripts. You can find it anywhere else. And I also have discussed this a few minutes ago. So, yeah, I won't repeat myself right now. Okay. Could we call this a day? I don't know. Is there any other question? Any other final questions, or if something I haven't actually spoken about? I think we are well beyond time, so okay then. Thank you, Monali. The Gothic is something we haven't spoken about, but yes, thank you. But yeah, I'll call this a day. If there's any other question, okay. Last thing, I really want you all to actually participate as actively as you have done today on the forum itself, because that is where a lot of discussion actually goes on or can go on. We can like begin different kinds of discussions. So please do take part in the forum, and yes, do check that regularly. All right. Thank you, everyone.